these are not normal times, and it's like we have extrajudicial like assaults on Americans and humans going on a daily basis now, and it's not okay. And even though all people kind of have to put one foot in front of the other and deal with the demands of the day, we cannot act like this is not happening. And I think I think what they're doing in Minnesota with the strike needs to expand. I think we should be talking about a national general economic strike until this is over and stop.
So today, January 30th, is supposed to be the National Liberal Day of Strike in America, which essentially means nobody go to work, don't go to school, don't spend any money in the economy, because we all need to come together and protest in solidarity against ICE. Although I have to say, it's a very interesting value proposition, because I'm not sure that these people were working to begin with. It's like, oh, all the leftists are going on strike in America. What will this mean? Well, I'm not exactly, the nursing homes might be a little bit empty. The poor nursing assistants get a day off because all the geriatrics wanted to go protest for no kings, right? Grocery stores that heavily rely on EBT cards will see a 50% drop in revenue for one day. Okay, Oh, the kids won't have to go to school because their teachers are too busy rallying in the streets for domestic terrorists instead. But, really besides that, I'm not exactly sure what this was supposed to prove. I think the whole point of it, as usual, is to be performative. As a matter of fact, true story. In Gainesville, Florida, the place I went to college in, I saw a local bar actually post on Instagram saying, we're still open today, but here's what you can do to support. And they share one of those, stupid Instagram infographics that basically says, here's how you can show solidarity and support your Somali criminal fraudster neighbors. And it's like, what is that? Oh, we're supporting the strike, but we're still opening today. Yeah, it really tells you a lot about the resolve of some of these people. But nonetheless, I want to tell you about that today, as well as show you what all the unemployed rallied today in Los Angeles to do, because we saw a situation where they essentially tried to storm into the federal building in Los Angeles, California. It looks like a literal war zone, and as usual, you see once again a scene where in a liberal city, ICE is under threat, they're under danger, keep in mind, right? So they're storming into this DHS building. This is the very place where Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass tried to sue against the Trump administration, saying there's no need for National Guard back last year. And notably, here you once again see LAPD absolutely nowhere in sight, completely have handed over control of the streets to the mob of domestic terrorists. I want you to remember that too, by the way, because even as maybe you get one temporary agreement from Minneapolis, this is still the liberal modus operandi nationwide, which is we are going to incite our own supporters to riot, to cause violence, to engage in domestic terrorism. We will not allow our own police to go and protect federal agents as that's all happening, but we'll call you the authoritarian bad guys if you remotely suggest deploying the National Guard or invoking the Insurrection Act to actually protect the lives of federal agents. I want you to also further remember that as it pertains to the government shutdown temporarily that's supposed to come tonight, and all these Democrats are saying, oh, we need reforms to ICE, this type of stuff needs to no longer be happening, that any deal or quote unquote compromise made by the left that also does not involve them standing down, right? That doesn't also say, okay, Democrats, if you don't want ICE to be using their current tactics, then you have to call off your dogs. You have to send in your police to help stop these violent mobs, and you have to stop inciting them to begin with. Then that is something absolutely that we cannot accept, right? These people engage in violence against ICE on basically a daily basis. That is simply true. And, in the few handful of events where ICE agents were forced to defend themselves, suddenly now that's the national story, right? That's something that, it's even scared members of the Republican Party so much. Even now they're saying, okay, maybe we went too far. It's bogus. We need to stop playing into these people's broken, backwards moral view, or worldview, I should say. But anyways, we'll tell you all about this today, guys, right? The National Liberal Day of Strike, and how, quite expectedly in left-wing fashion, it devolved into violence because I don't know if you've noticed so far, that's what they do. They're kind of I don't know if it's a mental thing or what, but incapable of ever actually engaging in peaceful protest, despite the fact that, Democrats always are like, oh, look at all these peaceful activists out in the streets. Yeah, is that what we're talking about here? But let's talk about it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, let's first of all show you some of the scenes today. For instance, you had a massive high school walkout in Meadow Creek High School in the state of Georgia. Some of you may remember a couple, actually during Trump 1, when March for Our Lives was a whole thing, and, this was considered a political tactic. Oh, let's, weaponize a bunch of children whose brains are not even developed yet, and they're not even old enough to vote. But look, they're marching and protesting on behalf of some liberal cause. Look at the youth, when in reality, having lived through this myself, right? I was in high school during March for Our Lives. I'll tell you firsthand, a bunch of these kids basically are thinking to themselves, well, we don't have to go to class. That's awesome, right? Oh, the teachers are cool with it, right? We can ditch. This is senior ditch day. Without any actual ramifications for it. That's, of course, the situation. But, of course, you always hear this rhetoric from the left wing saying, we need to support our teachers, education, which really, of course, always means supporting the teachers' unions. I like to point out, this is a high school where apparently the reading proficiency statistics, according to Libs of TikTok, reading proficiency at their school is 20%. The Georgia statewide average there is 40%. Both of these numbers are frankly horrendous. But yeah, they're like 50% below the statewide average for actual academic standards as it pertains to math proficiency. Similar situation, they're at 20%. Georgia's average is at 39%. So in other words, right, as the teachers' unions come out to rally their support behind the children, and look at what we're doing, teachers and kids standing together to protest against authoritarianism and fascism. And how dare the right wing so often demonize public schools like ours? This right here is the picture of why the right wing demonizes these schools and these institutions, right? You're talking about a place where the kids are literally subliterate, okay? They don't know how to read. And why is that? Because instead of educating the children, the teachers union and public school system here is basically training them instead on how to be future left-wing activists and agitators. And really, you're starting them young here, right? You're preparing them for a long life of defrauding government benefits by showing them, even when they're in school, hey, showing up, actually learning how to read, that's racist, as a matter of fact. No, much better to basically, prepare yourself to be a future anti-ICE agitator, right? We're not even making that up. And as a prime example of exactly what we're talking about, take a look at this video of one of the walkouts where this girl trying to lead the protest, she's probably the most politically engaged of all these kids, can't even speak because all these other knuckleheads are just, screaming and having a good time and basically celebrating that they're not in class today. Check it out. Well, certainly I'm glad to see so much education happening. Glad to see our public school system is standing firm in its mission to educate the future generations of EBT Americans. That second generation immigration is going so well. They're definitely not importing people into this country who their kids will be indoctrinated to essentially become racial Marxists and far left activists in school, and then, try to incite a race war, weaponizing issues like ICE or Black Lives Matter. No, none of that is happening, Everything is completely fine here. But that said, okay, let us now take a look, I should say, at the grown-ups that, these teachers are encouraging their kids to grow up and to be, right? Imagine the conversations in school, right? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an anti-ICE activist. It's like, okay, yeah, all right. But anyways, currently, today in Los Angeles, we did see a scene where apparently this mob attempted to storm the federal building where DHS and ICE are located in Los Angeles, California. That's right. They're back, ladies and gentlemen. creating a very fantastic look, obviously, for the peaceful day of protests on behalf of liberals. And you can see, as I said, the situation looks like a complete war zone, and local law enforcement doesn't even seem to be present, much less have any control.
You can see an officer back there. He's alone, and they're just throwing things at him. I mean, it's just pretty incredible that these protesters have overtaken this, and there's no police. I don't see anybody here to kind of manage this crowd. So like I was saying, this is at the tail end of a very long day. Looks like they're cheering because they were able to push that officer back inside. Okay, and now people, okay, all right, hold on. Do you see the police?
Now, you almost have to admire the shocking level of cognitive dissonance from the CNN reporters, and it's not the first time recently we've played a clip on this channel exactly like that, right? Where this reporter on the ground trying to cover the so-called peaceful protests, it's clearly not peaceful. They're trying to storm into a building. They're extremely violent. And every single time the CNN reporter acts shocked, it's pretty shocking to me. There's no law enforcement on the ground. Where are the police? Hey, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I don't know if you cared to acknowledge this in your nonstop reporting about Renee Good and Alex Preddy, but that is the story every single time out of liberal cities. Have you been paying attention? Are you aware that's what we've been complaining about? CNN, ABC, all these outlets, right? Because in the rare cases, this is so telling, right? Where they actually have the guts to send a reporter on the ground, every single time the reporters actually mouth agape, where is the order? What is going on here? Why is the local government not actually help? Yeah, we've been saying that. That's exactly what we've been saying, right? What has been the right-wing argument, by the way, on Alex Preddy and Renee Good, right? Has the Trump administration just been going on TV and celebrating these people's deaths? No, we've been saying from the beginning, even before these things happened, that we need the cooperation and help, ladies and gentlemen, of local and state police. That is the entire argument. If you held back these mobs, potentially dangerous situations would be less likely to occur. It's common sense, okay? And so the anchors who sit behind their desk in Washington, D.C. or New York City and talk about this stuff, they rarely will acknowledge it because despite all their claims, they're not actual journalists. They don't care to actually see what's going on. But you just have to love that every single time when they actually send reporters on the ground, you have reporters who not only acknowledge it's extremely violent, it's not peaceful, but secondly, where are the police? Right? It doesn't seem like the Democrat politicians' arguments that they have the streets under control and there's no need for National Guard and the Trump administration is just intimidating random U.S. citizens for no reason is all that justified. And by the way, when you see these repeated videos of how these left-wingers act, I don't know, crazy argument, I know, but perhaps has the nation considered that we are not the problem here, right? It is actually left-wingers who, first of all, are inciting these issues, okay? This is how they behave. Even on their national day of strike, they can't help but disgrace themselves or, maybe not disgrace themselves because I'd argue it's exactly what they want to be doing, right? They're making it very clear, okay, this is what we're all about. We're the party of violently storming federal buildings, impeding law enforcement, showing up with guns, trying to run people over, assassinating political figures that we're against. I mean, but pretty telling, again, right? Peaceful protest, though, by the way. Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom are going to get out today on TV, I'm sure, and praise the National Day of Action. It was so amazing to see Americans coming together. And meanwhile, this is the scene in their own state. Yeah. But just remember, if this scene continues and the Trump administration says, Insurrection Act, where's LAPD? Do we need to send National Guard? You're an authoritarian. It's peaceful. There's no need for this. That's what they said last time. Anyone remember? There's no need to send the National Guard.
We've been lied to from the very beginning. The politicians, California politicians, the mayor of Los Angeles, our governor, have completely failed in that nothing was happening in the beginning. It was allowed to spiral out of control, and then they have created this narrative that completely defies facts and a timeline that we know happened. And they keep calling it a peaceful protest, mostly peaceful, whatever they want to call it. But the reality is that law enforcement officers are being attacked, property is being destroyed, and it is out of control violence that really they're trying to deny for political gain.
It does appear that eventually LAPD ended up sending the riot squad, and you can see them here somewhat restoring order to the streets, declaring this an unlawful assembly. But I don't think I actually need a full chronology of the situation to understand. Okay, so earlier today, when they were causing all that havoc, it was daylight, and only now that the sun has gone down are the police finally showing up to the streets. I mean, what kind of response time is that? Or do we have the DEI dispatchers working? Is this the effects of defunding the police? We don't know. But yeah, it does seem like pretty common sense, especially on a national day of action. My understanding is this is in a pretty downtown sort of area of LA. Shouldn't you have the police on standby, right? Shouldn't you anticipate protests? It's almost like you probably had a good idea this was going to happen, but you wanted to make it seem like, or maybe you just wanted to express the very fact that you're on these people's side, and you were, of course, allowing that to happen. But then when we accuse Democrat state governments of engaging in insurrection, because after all, what is the argument, right? Clearly, you have a way to stop this. You're watching that right now. You have the manpower, but you refuse to send it, or you only send it after several hours of destruction, which means the entire scene you're watching out in the streets is intentional. And you hear that, by the way, backed up by Democrat politicians when they get out there and praise these protesters. So maybe our central conclusion of all of this ought to be, you are actually sponsoring violence against the federal government and the Trump administration. Yes, local governments and state governments are engaged in insurrection against the United States. Oh, that's too far. Right-wingers are speaking like authoritarians. What do they mean? Do they want civil war or something? They say to us, as Tim Walz goes on TV and compares the situation to the Civil War and says, we're in that moment again. This is the Civil War. This is Gettysburg. This is Anne Frank. Brandon Johnson, the Chicago mayor, says the right wing wants a rematch of the Civil War. And then when we dare to respond by saying, that seems like talk of insurrection. Should we invoke the insurrection? What? These people cry out in pain as they strike you, right? And frankly, that is the entire story of all this anti-ICE activism and all the quote-unquote controversy around it for the past several months by now, right? It's about learning the consequences of your own actions, which, where you're dealing with people here. I mean, their entire political ideology is essentially based on taking zero accountability for anything, so it shouldn't be all that surprising. And I've used the analogy before that leftists are essentially a bunch of overgrown children, but here's a prime example of that, right? Because dealing with these people is essentially like being a parent, and the kid just keeps on breaking things and screaming all the time and causing problems. They're failing in school, they're getting into fights, and then finally the parent says, okay, now it's time for you to be disciplined, right? You're grounded, we're taking your phone, or whatever pre-21st century parental punishment you want to insert there, right? And then the kid starts crying and says, you're the worst parent ever. I didn't do anything. I hate you. How could you do this to me? It's like, okay, literally you brought this upon yourself, because look at the way you're acting. But clearly, I guess you're dealing with people who kind of psychologically just never absorbed that lesson growing up, right? Probably got away their entire lives with being the perpetual victim, as you can see, by the way, in the scenes right now out at the high school walkouts, for example, right? And there's, the truth that the old heads have about the so-called new generation. I mean, as it pertains to like left-wing mindset, I think that's actually true, right? And then they grow up to basically become this, right? Become these people who, again, like in any political debate, their whole ideology surrounds on basically being that child still to this day, right? Just not causing a bunch of problems and then not taking accountability for anything and crying in the victim, literally crying out in pain as they strike you, right? And that's leftism basically throughout all of history. But anyways, to wrap up there, you essentially have it. Right. So this was the National Liberal Walkout Strike Day against ICE. The school kids were sure to get plenty of quality leering in. We saw some stuff getting broken into, a bunch of political mob violence, a riot out in the streets. What else is new, right? Just another day where Democrats remind us of exactly who they are and why they just should not be allowed to have power, right? And of course, the central argument behind all of this, as you watch this scene right here, is what? If you just gave us everything we want, we'd stop, committing violence, which is, just so persuasive. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.